So now that we've got our sequence cut, let's go ahead and start. Let's dive right into color correcting, matching cameras, and all of that. We're looking at our timeline, and now I set this up using the source, the multi-camera source sequence, which was the alternate version or the alternate setup to multicam. So I'm going to work with that one. To open up a source sequence, now all you have to do is find your source sequence. It looks like this in your project panel. If you'll notice at the top, real quickly, you can see that I'm in my color workspace. Okay, I'm already getting set up for color correcting, so I'm in my color workspace up on top. And in my project panel, I'm going to find my source sequence, which is right here, and right click on that and say open in timeline. And there we go, there's my 3 cameras. Now if you did the first version of that, you should have like your how-to video and then your how-to MC or multicam. All you have to do with that is find your multicam sequence and double click it. Whoop, double click the icon, and there you go, it will open up as well. Okay, so here we are in our timeline. Now you can see that we cut this out before, and you can see we didn't lose it. It's here. So let's do a couple things. First thing, in my upper left corner up here, I'm gonna click on Lumetri Scopes, and I've got a bunch of different things laid out here. Now I usually don't use this particular one. There's if you click the wrench in your Lumetri Scopes, then in the bottom right corner there's a wrench or settings, and you can adjust some of these. There's different scopes you can look at and use. Now I don't generally use the RGB scopes because or the RGB parade because it is right here. It's just overlaid with everything else. So I usually look at this one and I look at this one. Now quick look at the left one, at the YUV Vector Scope. 255 or 100, that's like as bright as can be. So if you're filming the sun or directly at a light bulb, it's most likely, if it's turned on of course, it's most likely going to be extremely bright. So that's going to be 100%. 0 is going to be black, it's just the opposite of that, it's complete blackness. So you can see my contrast is quite high here. You can also see that my saturation on this one is almost on, a little bit oversaturated in some points. So what we have here is a hexagon with all of the colors in the spectrum. So red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. Now these colors represent these 6 boxes right here below the white to black. So we've got red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta. And we're going to use these boxes to match each one of these as we go to get to color correct. But first, let's go ahead and set this up so that we are not too bright. And we'll see how much. I'll probably lost some data on this particular shot, but let's just take a look. So first thing I'm going to do is select my clip, which is the topmost one. And I'm going to come over to the right to Lumetri Color. Now some of this stuff may be turned off, so maybe minimized right here. So we're going to have to open it up. I start with basic correction. And I'm going to click this WB selector under white balance. So white balance selector, I'm going to click that. And I've got this card here. I know this first one right here is white, so I'm going to click that. Didn't really see much change. And now we're going to adjust our exposure, contrast, highlights, whites, shadows, etc. to kind of, we're going to work with this scope and take a look at that, or that parade. And bring that down. Okay, I'm going to bring my whites down a little bit too, my highlights. Okay. And I'm going to bring my shadows up a little bit. I might even bring my darks up, just a hair, and then boost my contrast. And I've got a little bit of room for saturation, so I can actually boost the saturation as a whole. Now we can also bring the saturation back as we work it. That's not too bad. It's still a little bright. I didn't really lose any data, but it looks a little bright. So now, let's go into curves. Now curves, we can do a lot of different things. We used to have just this one up at the top, but now we have all of these different ones. Hue versus saturation, hue versus hue, hue versus luma, and then luma versus saturation, and so on. Well, we're just going to work with the top two, hue versus saturation and hue versus hue. Now hue versus saturation, that's basically saying the color versus how saturated it is. So for instance, let's take a look at the red, and I encourage you to do this when color correcting. It is a little bit time consuming, but it does increase your accuracy. So I'm going to change to fit, or from fit, excuse me. I change from fit to about 150%, and I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to move down here so I can really see this card. Then I'm going to go under here, instead of Lumetri Scopes, I'm going to select Effects Controls, and I'm going to look at opacity. So this is the opacity for this clip, and I'm going to use the pen tool and draw a box around one color. So I'm going to start with the red, which is this one right here. Alright, and make sure, this is why we turn the other ones off. So this is the only thing we see. And you can verify that by clicking on Lumetri Scopes. You can see, all we see is the red. And you can see it's not pointing directly at red. You know, it's kind of more towards an orange. So we need to adjust that. So let's start with, instead of hue versus saturation, let's start with hue versus hue. So we'll get it pointing the right direction. I'm going to click the eyedropper next to hue versus hue and click this red. Now imagine each one of these is a piece of paper or a cylinder that's been flattened and laid out. Okay, so this edge would essentially be also connecting to this edge. So when you click a spot in the color, it creates 3 dots. A left, a right, and a center. So we selected red. Okay, and when we look at this, we've got 2 dots here and then 1 over here. The center dot is actually this one right here. Okay, so it would be left, center, right, because we're looking for red. So let's take a look and see what happens. If I take this red one here, hue versus hue. Now think of it, if I go up is right, yeah, or I can go down towards the yellow more. But we want to make sure this is red. So we're going to point this towards red like that. Okay? And then let's go hue versus saturation. Click that again there. And again, I could oversaturate it, undersaturate it, make it totally black and white. But I'm going to just kind of hit that box like that. Maybe. Let's take a look at hue versus luma. I click the same red, make it white, or I can bring some of that lightness out and make that more of a red. So that's where hue versus luma would come into play. Okay, so that's how you do one. So then what we would do is go ahead and take that box and move it over. And to select that box, I went over, selected my mask, came over here in my program panel, and I can move this around. So let's take a look at yellow. Okay, jump back to Lumetri Scopes. You can see it's pretty accurate, pointing to yellow. Let's double check that. 1, 2, 3. This is hue versus saturation, so let's increase the saturation just a hair. And then, of course, hue versus hue. Let's adjust it. There we are. And then, whoop. I think hue versus luma is pretty good. I don't think we need to make any adjustment with that one. Let's move on to the green. Clearly have to make an adjustment to the green because that looks really crazy. So green is way off. So let's select the green And that was hue versus saturation. Alright, so let's do this one down here. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what we've got. So I'm going to take my mask and I'm going to hit delete. And this one looks a little funky. I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to go back to fit. And that looks messed up. That's where we went wrong. The hue versus luma. So we need to adjust our hue versus luma because that clearly is messed up. It looked close, but now we're all over the place. So let's see here. Okay. So now we've adjusted this a little bit so it looks a little bit real. But now you can see if I just turn my effects off altogether by hitting this little FX, that's where I started and that's where I am right now. Okay. So that's where I started. You can see how this is all oblong and crazy. This is way over, it's too bright and it's too dark. And now we're more middle of the road and it's more evenly spaced around the frame. So you're gonna do that for each, I would do that for each camera you've got. So if you've got 2 cameras, you're gonna do that for 2 cameras. So I'm gonna have to find my, there we go. So I would do that again for this one, and so on right down the line. Now, if you're really accurate with this, each one is going to be pretty close to the same when you get all done with it. So if you know that your brightness is sitting at 230, then you want to make sure your brightness on all the cameras is sitting around 230, and how dark it is. And you can use these as guides, these numbers as guides, to make sure that everything is lining up. Now, it's not going to be exact simply because your shots are different, right? So they're going to be slightly different, but at least your color, as far as this is concerned, should be the same, and this should be pretty close as far as brightness and darkness. So go ahead and edit the color for each of your cameras in your video, and then we'll move on from there to cleaning up your audio.